My family saw me as a jobless outlier, while my startup was already secretly managing their pension funds. I stood in the foyer of my father's Greenwich estate, the kind of place where even the air smelled like old money and polished mahogany. My shoes were scuffed, and my suit was a 3-year-old off-the-rack number that made my brother Julian smirk the moment he saw me. He was draped in bespoke Italian wool, looking every bit the heir to the Evans investment group. To them, I was the glitch in the family algorithm, the one who walked away from a guaranteed seat at the boardroom table to play with computers in a rented garage. Tonight was my father's 61st birthday, but in this house, a celebration was never just a celebration. It was a performance review. I felt the weight of my phone in my pocket. It hummed twice, a notification from the Centenax core. We had just crossed a liquidity threshold that would make most mid-cap banks weep with envy. I could have pulled that phone out right then. I could have shown my father, Arthur Evans, the dashboard of the most sophisticated AI-driven hedge fund on the planet. I could have ended the years of pity dinners and the way my mother, Eleanor, looked at me like I was a tragic news story. But I didn't. There was a choice standing before me, cold and sharp. I could reveal my success and claim my seat at the table, or I could remain the invisible ghost, watching them worship the very machine I had built without knowing I held the remote. The choice became impossible when my father called me into his private study before dinner. The room was a fortress of leather-bound books he never read. He didn't look up from his desk for the first 2 minutes. He just let the silence settle, a tactic he used on junior analysts to make them sweat. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were hard, devoid of any fatherly warmth. He told me that he was tired of making excuses for me at the club. He told me that as of Monday, he had arranged a stager position for me in the mailroom of his firm. It wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. Take the job and learn the real world of finance, or he would officially remove me from the family trust and the guest list of every family event moving forward. He wanted to break me, to force me back into the mold he had designed. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a desperate urge to laugh in his face and tell him I could buy his firm 10 times over. But my pride took a different path. I told him I'd think about it. I saw the flash of disgust in his eyes. He took my hesitation for weakness. He didn't realize I was just deciding how much of his world I was willing to burn. The banquet hall was filled with the elite of the tri-state area. Men in tuxedos and women dripping in diamonds leaned in to hear my father's speech. I was seated at the far end of the table, near the swinging kitchen doors, the traditional spot for the family's greatest disappointment. Julian was at my father's right hand, glowing under the praise of the guests. Every time a waiter passed me, I felt like a ghost at my own funeral. My mother leaned over at one point, her voice a hushed, sharp blade. She told me she had already looked into some vocational retraining programs for me. She said it was for my own good, so I wouldn't have to live off the scraps of Julian's future. It was a unique kind of pain, being pitied by the person who was supposed to believe in you the most. Then came the centerpiece of the evening. My father stood up, clinking his crystal glass for silence. He announced to the room that Evans Investment Group had just made its most significant move in a decade. He bragged about moving the entirety of the family's private pension funds, the wealth of 3 generations, into a new elite management system called Centenax. He spoke about Centenax as if it were a god, a revolutionary AI that predicted market shifts with a 99% accuracy rate. He called the anonymous founder of the company a visionary of the highest order, a man who understood the predatory nature of the future. The irony was so thick I could nearly taste it. I sat there, picking at my cold salmon, listening to my father worship my brain while he looked at my face with total contempt. I tried to speak up. During a lull in the conversation, I asked him if he had done his due diligence on the Centenax security protocols. I knew the answer, of course. I had written them. But I wanted to see if he'd listen. My father didn't even look at me. He just laughed, a dry, mocking sound that prompted the rest of the table to join in. Julian chimed in, telling me to stick to fixing printers and leave the high finance to the adults. My mother sighed, looking away in embarrassment. I was being buried alive in a room full of people who shared my blood. Every attempt I made to engage, to even hint at my knowledge, was met with a wall of patronizing smiles. By the time the main course was cleared, I felt a hollow sense of despair. I wasn't just an outlier. To them, I wasn't even a person. I was a failure that happened to have their last name. The shock hit just as the dessert was being served. It started with a single chime of a phone, then another, and then a chorus of vibrations across the table. The atmosphere in the room shifted from celebratory to frantic in seconds. My father's face went from a healthy, scotch-flushed red to a sickly, ashen gray. A black swan event, a massive, unforeseen collapse in the Asian markets, had triggered a global sell-off. The news alerts were screaming, "Global markets in free fall!" Because my father had consolidated the family's entire wealth into Centenax only hours before, he was witnessing his net worth vanish in real time. He pulled out his tablet, his fingers trembling as he tried to log into the management portal to stop the automated liquidations. "It's locked!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "The system is frozen! The founder, this visionary, he's locked everyone out!" He turned his rage toward the room, as if looking for someone to punch. He blamed the technology, calling it a digital trap designed to steal from real businessmen. He looked at me, his eyes wild with a strange, misplaced anger. He told me that this was why he hated my computer games, because they lacked the honor of a handshake deal. He was losing everything: the house, the firm, Julian's inheritance, and even in the middle of a catastrophe, his first instinct was to use it as a reason to belittle me one last time. I watched him crumble. For a moment, I actually felt a flicker of sympathy. I thought about helping. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over the biometric bypass that would allow me to stabilize the Evans accounts. But then Julian grabbed my arm. He hissed at me to put my phone away, telling me that the adults were trying to save the family and that my distractions weren't helping. He actually tried to wrestle the phone out of my hand, convinced I was just playing a game or checking social media while their world burned. In that struggle, my father's tablet fell to the floor, the screen shattering. He looked at the broken glass and then at me, and he said the words that changed everything. He said he wished I had never been born, because at least then he wouldn't have to look at a failure while he lost his empire. That was the lowest point. I wasn't a son. I wasn't even a servant. I was a scapegoat for his own greed. I stood up. I didn't say a word to Julian as I shook his hand off my arm. I didn't look at my mother, who was weeping into a silk napkin. I walked toward the front of the room, toward the large projection screen that had been displaying a slideshow of my father's greatest achievements. I pulled a small HDMI bridge from my pocket, something I always carried, and plugged my phone into the system. The screen flickered, then roared to life. It didn't show my father's awards anymore. It showed the Centenax command interface. The room went silent. The scrolling red numbers of the market collapse were reflected in the windows of the ballroom. I didn't look at the guests. I looked only at the owner tab on the screen. With 3 steady taps, I initiated the sovereign override. The red numbers on the screen turned green. I didn't just stop the family's losses. I used the Centenax predictive engine to short the very collapse my father had been terrified of. In 60 seconds, I made back everything he had lost, plus an additional 20%. But I didn't do it for him. I did it to show him. On the screen, in bold, clinical font, the notification appeared. Access granted. Mark Evans, lead architect and CEO. The silence was so heavy it felt like it would crack the floorboards. My father looked from the screen to me, his mouth hanging open, his mind trying to reconcile the jobless outlier with the god of the system he had just been worshipping. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He tried to walk toward me, his hands shaking, his voice now filled with a terrifying, hollow sweetness. He started to call me son. He started to talk about how we were going to be the most powerful family in the country. My mother stood up, her tears suddenly gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating glint. She started talking about how she always knew I had a spark of genius. It was nauseating. Their love wasn't a constant. It was a variable that changed based on my net worth. They didn't see me then, and they didn't see me now. They only saw the Centenax logo. I looked at my father, the man who had just told me I was a mistake, and I did the only thing that felt like justice. I didn't take his money. I didn't ruin him. I simply revoked his administrative access to the fund. I told him the family's principal was safe, but that I would be moving it to a blind trust he could never touch. He would have his steady life, his administration, but he would never have power again. I walked out of the ballroom. Julian tried to stop me at the door, his face a mask of fake brotherly pride, but I walked right through him as if he were made of smoke. I left the Greenwich estate behind, the sound of my scuffed shoes on the gravel driveway the only noise in the night. They finally saw me, but it was too late. I had become everything I needed to be long before they noticed. As I got into my car, I saw a text from my father. "Let's talk tomorrow." I deleted it without reading. Recognition fades, but the conviction of building something on your own, that stays. My family thought I was an outlier, and they were right. I was the only one in that house who wasn't for sale.